Hello, everyone, and welcome to Friday's episode of Let's Talk About Shh. Today is the last episode for this week-long series that we've been doing on sexual health. How's everybody doing today? How's everybody feeling? Okay? Hope you had a good day. It was really hot today. Just checking to make sure we're all connected here. Looks like we're good. Okay. So, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, Let's Talk About Shh is a live podcast where we talk about love, intimacy, relationships, all that good stuff. Of course, you can call in or comment, which we do encourage. So who am I? My name's Tila. I'm a sex educator, relationship expert, and published author. I love doing sex ed, and I want people to enjoy the most that they can out of that part of their lives and have the best relationships they can. And that's sort of the goal with everything I do. So some guidelines, as I mentioned, I love it when people comment. I love it when people are engaged. So please feel free to chime in. One thing I just do want to stress, and I know I say this at the start of every episode, but we want to build a nice positive community here. There's no such thing as a bad question. So if somebody is commenting something, or maybe they call in and you think to yourself, wow, you don't know that, or that seems like a stupid question, please don't comment that. Please keep that to yourself. We want people to feel safe and comfortable to ask things that they may not know, or the answers that they've always wondered but have never gotten. Lots of people struggle with that and they don't know where to go for answers. So let's make it a nice, fun, and safe place for people to get answers and come together, okay? So open up the phone line. Hey, Amanda, good to hear you're doing all right today. Open up the phone line. So if you want to call in with your thought, question, comment, story, or maybe your own sex tip that you'd like to share with everybody, and call in at 1-877-777-5589. All right, so getting started on today's topic. Today I want to talk a little bit about living with an STI, or I guess in this case an STD, because we're going to talk about the ones that we can't quite cure yet. So primarily herpes and HIV. Now I'm not going to go into all the symptoms of all that. If you're joining us for the first time and you're wondering about, different sexually transmitted infections, please go back to the episode a couple of days ago. I talk about the major ones. We hash it all out. Also, just as a reminder for everybody, we're going to be doing some questions and answers. So if maybe you didn't catch the lives this week and you have some questions, or maybe you just have some questions, or maybe you just, have some questions about something else, please feel free to comment or call in at any time and we'll address those for you. So moving on. So there's a lot of different aspects to living with a sexually transmitted disease like herpes or HIV. And I'm not going to go so much into the medical parts of it. I think that conversation is a conversation that's best had with a person who's positive and their medical health professional, okay? Because everybody's a little bit different. What balance of medications and how the disease is going to be treated is going to be different for every person. So I think that I don't want to talk so much about that, because that's a conversation best had with nurses and doctors on a personal level. So we're going to talk about some of the other aspects, a little bit more about stigma, a little bit about mental health, a little bit about family planning, and, handling the day-to-days, okay? So a lot of people who have tested positive do face some mental health challenges typically with it. And mental health challenges is sort of it's something that all of us face in our day-to-day lives. I mean, life is full of stressful events, things like death, loss of a loved one of any kind, divorce, loss, job, moving. Sometimes even things that are really positive in our lives are really stressful. They say that getting married is like ranked in the top 5 things of most stressful events that somebody could experience. So there's all these things provide challenges for us, and can have a major impact on our health, on our mental health as well. And having a serious illness like HIV, which has some more risks, or even having something like herpes, which is just persistent and there's a lot of stigma around it, it can be another source of major stress for us. And you may find that living with a long-term disease, it can complicate some of the things you already have going on in your life, which of course can feed into how the disease interacts with your body and what sort of outbreaks or symptoms you may experience or how medications work for you. So, good mental health is going to, first of all, everybody wants good mental health. Nobody likes to feel bad. Nobody likes to feel crappy. Nobody likes to feel stressed, right? So managing that part of your life is a good way to sort of help as well. I realize that can be challenging because, like I said, some of the stigma that people face around sexually transmitted diseases is still pretty heavy, and that can cause a lot of anxiety for some people, understandably. And that being said, one of the most major conditions, mental health challenges that people face when they're diagnosed, particularly with HIV, is things like depression, and depression can range from mild to severe. And it could be something that, impacts the day-to-day living of someone. Symptoms like that can include things like anxiety or maybe persistent sadness, feeling empty or helpless and just constantly negative. Some people sort of experience a loss of appetite or maybe a disengagement from their common interests or engaging with others. The good news is that this is treatable as well. And if you've been diagnosed and you're positive with HIV or herpes and you're sort of feeling some of these symptoms, it's something I would discuss with your healthcare professional because it could be part of your treatment plan, okay? So there's lots of different options out there to help with some of these things. And there's actually also a lot of support groups. There's even support groups for people who get STIs that are curable as well. Just because people do face a lot of stigma, that can have a lot of impacts and backlash, right? So don't be afraid to check out some of the support groups or check out what's going on. I'm not going to try and list them here because there's a list, but I have been publishing a copy of the recording with a little detail of what we discussed on my website. So anybody who's interested in getting links to some of those sources, please check out my website, exploresextalk.com, and look for this episode. And I will make sure to include those links in there because there's lots of things like different support groups and different also healthcare providers that specialize in health management for people living with herpes and HIV. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? I know this is once again, one of those subjects that people are like, oh my God, why are we talking about this? But it's an important thing to talk about. Part of talking about what happens if you contract one of these diseases that we can't cure right now takes a big step to knowing that, things are manageable. This is not a death sentence. Your life is not over, okay? Lots of people, when they contract one of these illnesses, feel that their life is over and that's it for them. And that's a horrible way to feel. Your life isn't over. There is life living with HIV. There's life living with herpes. It's not ideal, but it's manageable, right? People can still have good lives and people can still have good sex lives, right? And the more we talk about that, the more we reduce that stigma, the less intense it's going to feel for people, okay? So it's important to have these kind of conversations. And speaking of dating and love life, a common question that kind of comes up is, what now, right? If somebody contracts HIV or herpes, what do they do now? Can they date now? Yeah, absolutely they can, for sure. In fact, there's even dating sites that are more geared for people who are positive. It's a place for people to meet other positive people so they don't feel so stressed. I'm not saying that people who have tested positive should only date people who have tested positive. I think that's a very much a personal choice, and it's a matter of comfort level. Some people just find it less anxiety provoking about disclosing their status to someone who shares the same status. So it's not a, separation thing. It's purely a personal preference and comfort thing. And it's about choices that you make, right? So there's no right choice for every single person. Everybody should choose what's right for themselves. But that being said, regardless of what sort of choice you do make, it's important to stay calm. Remember, your life isn't over. Millions of people have herpes. Like, it's like 1 in 6 people have herpes. That's a lot of people when you think about how many people just in North America, 1 in 6 people. That's a lot of people. Okay. For most couples, herpes is not also considered a super big deal. As we talked about when we talked about STIs, HIV is not the death sentence it used to be. There's so many drugs now that can help, people attain. I guess attain works too. Anyway, can help people achieve, HIV undetectable, where it's like not possible for them to pass on an HIV infection. And then, you might have remembered, we also talked about PrEP, which is a drug that a person can take that will prevent them from, if they're negative, will prevent them or reduce the risk of contracting HIV. So there's lots of different ways that people can manage relationships. Dating does not have to be over just because someone tests positive with something like herpes or HIV. I think it is important that people have realistic knowledge about these STIs. And, we sort of talked all through this week about people's lack of knowledge about the subject. It's not a fun subject. People don't like to talk about it, but the thing is people need to talk about it. So many people have that scare tactic from traditional abstinence-based sex ed, where it's, don't do this or else you'll get this big scary thing that'll ruin your life forever. And lots of people stick with that. That's what they remember, so having those conversations and knowing the facts and knowing what the reality is a really big part to reducing that stigma, reducing that those misconceptions that make people feel really crappy, right? If you are someone who is positive, thinking about disclosing to someone that you're interested in seeing so that they can make an informed choice, make sure you pick a time that's comfortable for you, some time that you're not going to feel rushed. And if you feel nervous, maybe practice talking with a friend first, role play it, if you will. If you're someone who is negative, who is speaking to someone you're considering dating who's positive and they're disclosing their status, please try to remember that this is probably a really difficult conversation for them. You're allowed to have your own reaction. Absolutely. You're allowed to feel how you feel about it, but that doesn't mean you can make someone else feel crappy about it. If you decide that that's too much risk for you, that's okay. That's your choice, right? That's why they're informing you, so you can make an informed choice. But please remember that it's a difficult conversation for a lot of people, and how you react and what you say can be very crippling to somebody else because they're making themselves very vulnerable, right? So just make sure that, as much as possible, try and control your reaction, try to remember what your facial expressions are doing. If this is something that's a huge anxiety point for you, maybe practice that with a friend, have them role play telling you so you can see how you're going to react, see how you're going to feel. You can practice your reaction. I know that some people are like, well, that sounds silly. Yeah, well, it sounds silly until you're stuck in that situation and then you make a horrible face and someone else feels awful and then you feel like a humongous jerk, right? Would you rather that or just practice beforehand? And that's only if it's a trouble spot for you. Lots of people aren't bothered by STIs because they're well informed, right? So it sort of depends on where you're at and how you're feeling. It's okay, like I said, to sort of feel how you feel. Just make sure that you're aware, okay? It's important to know, unfortunately, that because of some of the misconceptions and stigma around STIs, that if you're someone who is positive, looking to disclose, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but please, please be aware that it may not be safe for you to disclose. I would like to think we live in a world where everybody's cool And, things are relationships are safe places, but the reality is that they're not always. And if you feel that a partner that you're disclosing to, you know, may hurt you or jeopardize your safety, you might want to consider maybe not telling them in person. You can maybe try telling them on the phone or email or text or whatever, but just remember to prioritize your own safety. If you feel that safety is a concern for you, make sure you take steps to keep yourself safe. There's lots of resources. I have some scrolling across the bottom of the screen for different hotlines where you can get more advice, or if you want to talk to somebody about it beforehand or anything like that. So please prioritize your own safety. That is so important. So important. So a lot of people do feel worried about disclosing, and that's pretty normal too. We sort of talked about that a little bit, I guess, but just keep in mind, do what's going to be best for you, and just try and roll through it. Does anybody have any questions or comments so far? I know this is everybody's favorite topic that everybody wants to chime in on because it's so much fun to talk about. So another big question that a lot of people have when they test positive, particularly more of a concern for HIV, is actually workplace safety. So any kind of job where there's a risk of, cuts, scrapes, any kind of chance of blood being shed, you have to think about how that can play in the workplace. The good news is lots of workplaces have protocols and policies in place already that are designed to protect people and are designed to protect the person who is positive as well, because of course you cannot be discriminated against for having an illness. You cannot lose your job for having an illness. And if somebody does fire you for having an illness, you have a lawsuit. Okay? So, but it's important that everybody stays safe. Okay? So, in Canada, it's less of an issue. Lots of companies, it's actually in many policy procedure manuals I have seen. If you work somewhere where it does not, I believe Workplace BC also covers I guess if you're in BC, Workplace BC covers a lot of, the expectations about that sort of thing as well. In the States, of course, it's a little bit different. Their legality rules are different than ours, of course. There is a organization that actually helps businesses address any concerns about having HIV positive employees. It is called Business Response to AIDS, or BRTA. And it's free, and it's a public-private partnership that actually happens with the Center of Disease Control. And they work with the Human Resources Department at different businesses in order to prevent stigma, reduce stigma, prevent discrimination, and all of that good stuff, and keep people safe. So if you're in a workplace that, doesn't have those kind of policies, I would try looking into, BRTA. And once again, I will post links to resources and websites on my website with this replay of this episode. Another big question people have when somebody is HIV positive or herpes positive is family planning. Can you have a baby? Is it safe to have a baby? And, it depends a little bit on your situation. Overall, the answer is yes. You can have kids. Kids can be had. There's lots of safe ways to do that. The answer to these questions is sort of best answered by a nurse or doctor, but there is, depending on if it's the mother or the father who is positive, is going to change what the plan is sort of going to be. Most of the time, it's mostly the concern when the mother is giving birth, because actually, typically, most, like for herpes, for example, the the infection is most likely to pass to the baby during the actual birthing. HIV, is a little bit different, but the point is that there's drugs that the parents can take. Chances are they're probably not going to be all that different from the drugs they're already taking to manage the disease. It just might be a different balance of medications in order to minimize that viral load and make it safe for the kid. If there is a baby that has been exposed to HIV or herpes, actually, well, maybe not with herpes, but with HIV, there is also antivirals that can be given to the baby that is safe. That basically, I'm not going to say it zeroes out the risk. There's always like a small chance, but it makes it pretty small. So that's good. So once again, your life is not over. Family planning can happen. It's great. So, you don't have to be afraid of those sort of issues. We sort of covered most of what I wanted to talk about in terms of common questions for living with HIV or genital herpes. I kind of wanted to leave some time open for questions and answers for anything for this week. I know that we burned through a lot of different information. And so if there's any questions that people have or thoughts that people have, stories they want to share, anything like that. You guys are so quiet today. And like I said, everybody's favorite subject, STIs. So important to know, though. Okay, well, you guys are quiet. Nobody's calling in. Do you guys have any other questions about anything else or thoughts or stories you want to share? Otherwise, it's going to be a pretty short episode. So for next week, I was thinking that the theme for next week is going to be Pride. Because, of course, next week we start Pride Month. Yay! And I was reading yesterday and today, actually, that there is apparently some sort of ridiculousness happening on 4chan, which is not totally surprising because it's 4chan. For those of you who don't know what 4chan is, it is a online forum where people are generally pretty awful to each other and other people. Not to say it's entirely that way, but in my experience, it is mostly that way. It's where a lot of people hang out and are really negative and awful to other people. And a group of people on 4chan have decided, or so the report goes, that next week, starting Pride Month, they are going to send derogatory and harassing messages to members of the LGBTQ community. To that, I say, seriously. And also, if you have something horrible and awful to say, you call in and you say it. Don't hide behind a little screen name. Call, and I will chat with you about the horrible things that you're going to say, okay? Because, yeah, that's not okay. We should not be deliberately hurtful and mean to each other. I don't see the point. Like, why would you do that? Anyway, so that sort of, I wasn't necessarily going to do a Pride theme, but after hearing that, I was like, this is why we have Pride. This is why we need Pride. And so next week, we are going to talk about some Pride-themed subjects. If anybody has any things that they would like to see for Pride theme, please let me know in the chat or shoot me an email or, a message or whatever. If there's like, oh, I'd really love for you to talk about coming out or straight pride or, any subject, controversial or not, let's tackle it next week. And yeah, I guess that's all for today. A really short one we're doing. Really short. That's okay. All right, so our next episode, of course, will be Monday, June 1st, 8 p.m. Pacific Time, 11 p.m. Eastern. As always, please check out my website, exploresextalk.com, for articles, games, fun times had by all. Please share, like, subscribe, follow, whatever the platform you're on asks for, and let people know that this podcast is happening. Next week we're talking pride subjects, which will be super fun. Probably a lot more fun for other people than this week, but that's okay. Yeah. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great weekend, and take care, and have a great night.